First, I wanted to thank you last night for the conversation that you and I
Sure.
had that kind of helped work through some things with me, and it really was helpful. So maybe actually we'll have an opportunity to talk about some of those things too at some
Sure.
point during this.
Sure.
But my first question for you is, and this is going to sound probably similar to a lot of the questions I asked you up in Ludington, but just how did you get involved with Zen practice?
Well, I was in high school. This was in the late 70s, and I had noticed that my mother was reading a novel called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I just picked it up one day and I was reading it, and actually I didn't care for the novel too much, and so I never finished reading it. But I had a question: what is Zen? And in like the late 70s, it was kind of in the air. You would hear the word now and again, and I had, I guess, and I just wondered what it was. Well, a little while after that, I happened to be in a bookstore, and I usually made a beeline for another part of the store. I kind of like to read science fiction novels, actually, at that time. And I was on my way there. But as I was rushing down the aisle, a book, just I saw the cover out of the corner of my eye, and it was The Three Pillars of Zen. That was the famous Kapleau book, of course, and I just picked it up and I read a few pages, and I thought, that sounds very interesting to me, and I bought it on a lark. I took it home. I started to practice meditation in my room. So I was like a senior in high school, I think, and I really, really took to it. Everything that Yasutani Roshi said about meditation practice and explained about the Buddha's experience rung true for me. But I really wanted to verify it for myself, which is one of the tenets of our practice, of course. So I just kept sitting, and it doesn't take very much experience sitting, 1 or 2 sessions maybe, and you already begin to realize the benefits from meditation. So I just kept doing it. So that's how I got started.
Okay. Now you must have, that's some pretty heavy stuff for like a high schooler, to be kind of finding themselves in alignment with, I think. Why were you drawn to that practice? Like, what was there something like kind of going on for you at the time, or some kind of existential crisis, or what was going on?
Well, I was a teenager, so there was all of that.
Mm-hmm.
From my very earliest memories, I always felt like there was something that I was missing. I didn't feel bad in missing it, but I yearned for it. Like as a child, I would get up at 4 a.m. This is before I was in kindergarten even, and I would go outside in my pajamas and watch the sun come up and listen to the birds. It had something to do with nature, it seemed to me, but it also had something to do with me. I was rather introverted. And when I was alone in nature, like a lot of other people, I felt like I was in closer contact with it, whatever it was. As a kid, I couldn't have explained it any better than that, if even that. And that was an interest that just has always been a part of the aggregation of conditioned things that I am. And so a tradition that focuses on introspection, meditation, enlightenment, what at that time Westerners might have referred to as the transcendent. It just made a lot of sense to me, and it struck me as of an accord with who I am as a person. Mind you, I wouldn't have been able to say all of that.
Yeah.
All I knew is that there was some kind of mystery in the world that I did not understand. And I wanted to, I yearned for it, yearned to understand, and I had an instinct that something about Zen practice, something about meditation would allow me to understand it.
Thank you. Now, going back a little bit to, you mentioned seeing Roshi Philip Kaplow's book, 3 Pillars of Zen. What was helpful about that book for you at the time? Did you actually pick it up and buy it and read it? And
yeah, I bought it. I took it home. I felt at that time that I needed to keep it a secret from my parents because I didn't think that they would approve of me reading these cult things, these esoteric things. They were fairly conservative people at that time. Since then, they've changed a lot, so that's not a concern. It hasn't been for a long time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I bought the book. What appealed to me was the logic. Suffering is life. Life is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire, by craving. Craving can be ended. The way to end it is to follow this practice. Well, those are the 4 Noble Truths, of course. And the third one, that suffering can be ended, the desire can be ended, craving can be ended, is not something we can really know, especially at the beginning. But if you can't find any fault with the first Noble Truth, and you can't find any fault with the second Noble Truth, it's fairly easy to establish some faith in the third one, and then to strike out on the path described in the fourth Noble Truth, the Eightfold Path. So there was this logic that affirmed my own experience, even as a youngster, and I've never found any exception to the first Noble Truth, life is suffering. I've never found any exception to the second Noble Truth either. And so after 30 years, I'm fairly well convinced that those really are truths, okay? So there was the logic. There was also the individualism, or what seemed to me at that time to be the emphasis on individual practice, individual awakening, the individual verification of the Buddha's great experiment. We didn't, in the Zen tradition, just take his word for it. We might have an instinctive feeling that he was right, that he spoke the truth, that he was sincere, that it could be so, but we don't just accept it blindly. We have to practice for years to confirm that what he said is the truth. But you know, that personal, individual, person by person, all people throughout space and time who have practiced, everybody has to confirm it individually. And that's something that as an American really appealed to me. I didn't want to inherit truth. I wanted my own experience of the truth. So that jived with me. I mean, now really, traditionally, Buddhism isn't all about individualism. We've got the Sangha to think about too. So that's something we can grow into. So logic and individuality were the first things that appealed to me. Mm-hmm. Well, that and the the wonderful feelings of calm and alertness, centeredness, focus, confidence that even a beginner appreciates when sitting Zazen. I wouldn't have known what to call it at the time, but I probably fairly quickly developed a sense of the experience of what's known as piti, sukha. These are words typically translated as rapture and bliss. They're basically forms of spiritual pleasure that arise as a result of letting go. And it feels very good, even if you don't know what it's called. It doesn't matter. It feels good, and you know it's right, so you keep doing it. Okay. So those are the things that appealed, and still do.
We just wanted to check to make sure. Okay, this is fine. I was worrying a little bit. Like, is this actually recording? Okay, very good. You had mentioned, a core truths of Buddhism, and that clinging is the cause of our suffering. So there's probably a lot of people out there, maybe, who would be watching this, who are wondering, okay, so what do I do about my clinging? Like, or how do I not cling to things? And so how would you answer that, or how would you respond to them?
Well, I would just reiterate what the Buddha taught. If you're interested in what happens when we let go of our attachments, when we stop clinging so much, then do what the Buddha advocated. That's all I advocate. The core of Zen practice is meditation, Zazen. So practice Zazen. If you have to practice on your own, practice on your own. But the best thing to do is to get yourself to a good teacher and really listen carefully to the teacher and sit with a Sangha, with a community of practitioners. It's very easy if you're practicing on your own to lose your sense of discipline. It's very easy to convince yourself that something more important needs to be done than your sitting practice. But when there's a regular schedule at a Zen center or a retreat center of some kind or temple, you go there, and you don't go there to watch TV. You don't go there to read magazines. You go there to sit, and that regular schedule, that regular contact with a teacher who is paying attention to your growth and thinking about what you might need, makes for a really strong foundation for your practice. And then, if your question is pointed more at the, dealing with the actual on-the-ground fact of self-clinging, here's what happens when we meditate. When we learn how to concentrate the mind on one thing and only one thing, we become calm. We let go of things that have always distracted us, bothered us. And in that calm space, in that concentrated, calm, and alert space, we can more objectively look at ourselves and see, well, there are many things to see, but to see the actual mechanisms of suffering, to see that it was my desire that created my suffering. This is easier to understand if you're looking at examples. If I say, don't show that picture of me to anybody else. It's a terrible picture of me. But they do show the picture of you to a whole bunch of people, and you feel humiliated, ashamed, embarrassed. Why are you suffering? Why are you having these feelings now? If you don't look into yourself very carefully, very calmly, in a focused and objective way, you're far more likely to blame the person that shared the photo. But the reality is that you feel embarrassed because you want people to see only a beautiful you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why is that? You look into it further. You only want them to see a beautiful you because you know they will pass judgment on you, or you are afraid they will. And if they see like an unphotogenic you, an ugly you, a tired you, that they will think there's something wrong with you, that you're flawed. And we fear that kind of judgment. But I have this desire. I want people to love me, or I might even want them to admire me or adore me, depending on the personality, right? So I have that desire. And until I recognize that it is that desire that causes me to be embarrassed when the situation doesn't allow me to get what I want, then I have a problem. Sitting allows me to see that mechanism, see those connections much more readily than when we're just kind of sitting around feeling agitated and pointing the finger of blame. It doesn't mean that we're bad people because we have desires. It doesn't mean that we are bad people or sinners or evil or anything of the kind because we want to be loved, because we don't want to endure the pain of ostracization, marginalization, being dismissed, being ignored. It's perfectly natural. But to understand the mechanism helps us realize that we individually have control over how we live our lives, how we respond to our lives. And it's how we respond to our lives that determines whether we're going to enjoy it or not enjoy it. So I'd prefer to enjoy it.
And that takes us actually to one of the things that I did want to discuss, because it was really so helpful, was this conversation that you and I had last night. It sounds like at one point, and probably still, you had struggled with depression in your life. I have been struggling with it in my life. And you said something which I don't know if you call these things turning points or what they are, but because they're things that you already kind of know. But it's like there's these moments in your life where you're ready to receive them, I think. And I was talking about, these fears that we have of being a failure or being alone or whatever else it is. And you said, your life right now is a failure, and I hope you keep making mistakes. And so I found that really helpful, but maybe you could talk a little bit about what you meant by that and how that can help people maybe through some hard times, and then maybe also talk a little bit about the very practical suggestion that you gave me about the journaling idea, or sitting with this issue for 30 minutes or an hour. Talk a little bit about that as well, about how people can work through these things.
So failure. Well, I think in our conversation, the point that I was trying to make clear is that we cause ourselves a lot of suffering because we have an idea that we're hanging on to about success and about failure. And those are just ideas. I think this is probably a bigger concern for men. If we were going to make some kind of sweeping generalizations, it does have some bit of a tendency to break down along gender lines, but like men are very concerned with their success and their power. Not that women aren't too, but we just have a lot of trouble with it. So my point about being a failure now and always is simply to say, or to say in very simple terms, something that might require a little more elaboration. And that would go something like this. Life is not fixed. Life is not any particular thing. It is always changing, always moving, not knowable. Our senses are decent, but that does not mean that what we sense is inherently successful or inherently failing. So any endeavor that we make to control the outcome of our actions in order to achieve a success or to avoid a failure is based on a faulty view, which is that we have control over a universe that will not hold still, that we have control over a universe that is not fixed, not permanent. We can try very hard to accomplish things. We can make actually no mistakes at all and still not accomplish anything. So, in a sense, we're never going to succeed in the way we imagine that we might, even when things temporarily go our way. We can't ultimately control the universe because everything is moving around and everything is unfixed, changing, impermanent, transitory. You could say that everything is a failure, but I mean it in kind of a humorous way, or I mean it in the sense that if we are really attuned to our lives, really truly living our lives moment to moment, we're not concerned with success or failure, either one. And that is the failure that I really want people to get to. It's a bit like one of the Zen idioms that we hear from time to time or read in books, like dying to it, to become a corpse. And we never mean that literally, and we also never mean apathy or complacency. It's actually just the opposite. Again, to be really attuned to your life, to be intimate with your life, with reality, means that you are no longer a separate, solitary you. And if there is no separate and solitary, single, discrete self, how could there be success or failure? Those things are pinned to the idea of a self that has no basis in fact, at least so far as we can observe. What I am, just like everything else in the universe, is unfixed, impermanent, transitory. So it's not that I don't try hard. I work incredibly hard, and I do try to do a good job in the things that I do. But our practice is about being okay with all of it, being okay with working hard, being okay with slacking off, being okay with the results, regardless of what the results are, and also being okay with disappointment, being okay with unhappiness, being okay with depression, being okay with joy, being okay with all the things that we can think of from the relative point of view. But from the absolute point of view, there is nothing that we can identify, nothing that we can know.
There's a I didn't want to step over you. There's definitely a certain.
Yeah, no, it's not you. You asked me a two-part question, and
I did, and so
taking a long time to answer you, and I'm trying to retrieve what we were talking about last night, and it's kind of hard to do. So and there was some kind of technique, and I don't even remember what I was suggesting now.
Yeah, isn't that funny? But it was really, really helpful to me. It was, we were talking, for context for people that are watching, I have been going through a significant period of time of kind of darkness, depression, not functioning real well, relationship issues, all kinds of stuff. And so actually I just contacted Gendo to see if we would do an interview, and we started talking, and so after you had said that to me, it's funny, it really mattered to me, the failure part, which was, it was kind of like, what
it means is give up.
Right, because I was...
Failure means give up. Just give up. That's failing, in a way, but it is it's the supreme success.
Yeah.
Give up.
Exactly. Let go of this need to... That's the way I took it anyway, was to just be like, right now, where you are, you're already miserable. Like, the place that you're speaking from is misery. Like, you're depressed, you're in this place, and you're worried about failing once again, about quitting cigarettes, or, I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life, or all these different things. And it was just like, you don't have anything to lose. Like, you're already kind of down here, like, why don't you just kind of work your way up? The other part that we talked about was the journaling thing, or you had said, you can make a practice of this for 30 minutes or an hour. You were talking about an experience you had sort of like a midlife crises kind of thing, which your teacher had asked you to maybe sit with that and look at that problem or this scary kind of future that you see for your bleak future that you see for yourself, and to take the time to look at all the possible positive things that surround that, or that are a part of that situation. So that's what I meant. I went and I did that. And it felt, at first, I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this. Like, it's kind of silly. But then afterwards, I was like, wow, that was really kind of effective and powerful. And then this morning, I did that with cigarettes as well, and after we actually had our conversation, I decided to stop smoking again, and then this morning, you can have these moments where you have this clarity, and I know I could fall down again, right? But this morning there was this tremendous feeling that I've never had before, of I'm not going to smoke again. I've decided I'm done. I've had enough, and that's where I'm going to stop with it. And there's a lot of things that I need to tackle at the moment in life, but just little things here and there, and to kind of build from that. But anyway, I'm going on and on. That advice that you had given me last night I found really helpful, and I want to thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Appreciate it. So it sounds like I captured that pretty well in terms of the advice that you had given. Talk a little bit about your you have a Zen group called Great Wave Zen Sangha, which just recently, I think, you had to vacate the center property that you had originally. What are the challenges, because you live in a kind of very rural community, what are the challenges of starting up a community in a place where, there's not much happening?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can speak to that. I guess what I think about it, though, is based on just that one experience, and I don't really have anything to compare it to. It's not like I've tried to start up a community anywhere else. I did have sitting groups in other places in the country. People would come over to my house and things like that. That was long before I was a priest. It was like way long before I became a teacher. Here, Great Wave started in 2001. We started like maybe a month before 9/11, and we've been going continuously since then. Although there's been this hiatus because we had to vacate the premises where we had been practicing because the owner of the property had to put it to another purpose. And so the challenge is, well, the different facets of it would include things like living in a place where there is, first of all, very little money, just in general. Mm-hmm. This is one of the poorest regions in the state of Michigan. Unemployment is extremely high. The population is very low. It's rural, as you mentioned. And so there's isolation. We're relatively remote. So you have an isolated population that has not been exposed to ideas like the ideas we find in Buddhism or Zen. They're unused to it. They may distrust it really significantly. They may even hate it and say so. That hasn't been much of a problem, but sometimes. And then just having a very small population base means that your group of practitioners is small. It's kind of like a center's size is proportional to the community in which it exists. And since there are only 8,000 people in the city where I live right now, then the center is proportionally smaller as compared with what you might find in any major city in the United States. So if you don't have that large of a Sangha, that means that there are fewer people carrying the log, so to speak. Everybody's wearing multiple hats. And that's hard work. Requires a lot of commitment, especially if you're trying to do what I've been trying to do, which is to maintain a service schedule, to have people in the traditional roles and positions that you'd see in a temple, to train them how to do those things, and then they have to do multiple roles. So that's hard. The lack of money means that it's very difficult to buy a space of our own. It's expensive. One of the ironies is that this particular place is a resort town or a vacation kind of town on the shore of Lake Michigan, and so the nicer, prettier kinds of properties that where you might want to locate a center are very expensive, like wildly expensive. So Um, so these are some of the challenges. I want to say, though, that a small group can be very good. It can have advantages over large groups. It can have advantages that large groups cannot possibly hope to have. Like a lot of one-on-one contact with the teacher, for example. Also, that business of having to occupy multiple roles or take on different positions, like during a retreat, a session, means that people are really hopping. There's no just sitting around usually. We even spend some of our so-called breaks doing work that maintains the harmony of our practice environment, doing some cleaning, things like that. So people have to let go. They have to let go of their self-centered interests in indulging themselves in R&R various kinds, in spite of the fact that they're on retreat, and serve the Sangha. And it's like no one's immune from that, including myself. So I'll have multiple roles, even as the teacher. So that's good. Letting go of that. Letting go of that wish that you can get away from stuff, or that you can become anonymous, or that you can hide, or that you can defer. The buck stops with every single person in a small Sangha, and that's a good thing. We really grow from that. So, I guess what I'm saying is that some of those challenges are nice to have. And, I mean, the Buddha was homeless. We're homeless now.
Well, I can speak personally for myself, and I find that I everybody's different, but I find that I gravitate more towards the smaller Sangha because there seems to be more intimacy, and like you said, you do have more opportunity to connect, and frankly, the whole kind of implication, in my view, of Sangha is that we're there to be connecting with people and one another. So, what do you think? There's a problem with sort of like an entrepreneurial attitude toward Zen Buddhism, where I'm going to keep enterprising and kind of building and building and building this thing? Like, what's the downside to that approach? Is there a downside?
Well, I would never want to make any generalization about that, really. I mean, the downside is always, no matter what you're talking about, it has to do with suffering and attachment. So some centers may very successfully develop an entrepreneurial wing that provides the financial support that allows us to sit.
It's true.
Even in the Buddha's day, there were aristocrats that had wealth, and they could afford to build a vihara. The Buddha and his monks could take shelter in during the rainy season. So they were benefiting from wealth. We in the United States don't have a monastic tradition like that of Asia or like that of Europe. What we have is commercialism and shopping malls, capitalism. And so we do, our culture has taught us to do, has conditioned us to do. It would be very difficult for us to, walk in a line down the street going from house to house with our begging bowls asking for food. I mean, in this country, that's not going to work. I mean, people don't recognize monks as monks. Even if you tell them you're a monk, they don't know what that means. So we have to do what we have to do to support the group. The downside, I mean, people talk about the distraction of having a commercial wing to the Zen Center or the temple. We're going to sell books, and we're going to sell incense and bells and all this stuff. And it can be distracting. It can start to take on a power of its own that might seem to dwarf the real purpose of people coming there. And then, of course, there's a lot of worry if that entrepreneurial wing doesn't make any money. And of course, there's the factor that we all have to pay attention to in all situations in this time period and in this place on the planet, and that is, are we trying to accumulate wealth beyond what we need? Do we know what we need, really? Hard question to answer in this culture. And so, is greed our motivation, or is simply trying to support the practice of our tradition the motivation? Sometimes it gets a little murky, so that'd be a downside. So there are some groups that say, I will never do it. I will not ever, or we will not ever engage in that kind of activity. We will do it strictly by donations. Others say, no, we're going to go full bore. Just accept who we are.
Excuse me.
Be here in the United States, be Americans, do what we do. Try to keep it in perspective, but we're going to do it. And then, of course, everything in the middle. So I think every group is going to have to figure it out for itself, and it's going to vary depending on the size of the group, the location of the group, the personalities of the people involved, and what the teacher thinks is appropriate for practice. So it's all over the map.
Okay.
Not having a business wing has disadvantages. So it's a mixed bag.
Yep, absolutely.
Just like everything.
Well, we're coming close on the hour, so I just have one more question, then we'll kind of, actually two more. The I always ask for book recommendations and that kind of thing. But then we're going to do sort of the final, if we didn't talk about something that, you would have liked to talk about, then now's your time to do so. Or forever hold your peace. Yeah. So, first, while my brain is farting, what books would you recommend to people that are kind of interested in Zen practice? And also, would you tell them to sit down on a cushion as well?
Would I tell them that?
Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah.
Right. You don't say. No?
Yeah, you gotta sit. But I don't think it's appropriate to just sit and never read anything. That said, there are some very good books in all the Buddhist traditions that are represented here in the United States. I think it's tremendously important to get connected with a Sangha and a teacher in order to get some filtering on what kinds of things to read, and here's why. This is old advice, but it's really clear in my mind because I have seen what happens if this filtering doesn't take place. Because we have access to so many books, so much media, so many choices in this country, people will read in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the Zen tradition, the Chinese Zen tradition, Thich Nhat Hanh, Korean. Well, all these different traditions truly do have the same core teaching, the teaching of the Buddha, but what they emphasize in practice can vary quite a bit. And practitioners who are new to the tradition, or they're new to practice, might read out of all of these traditions and get really confused. And it's hard to help those people become unconfused. They think that the different traditions are contradicting one another. They really aren't in almost every case, but it seems like it to them, and it's hard to get them straightened out. So read in just one tradition that feels comfortable for you. That's the first advice. In Zen, I like Charlotte Joko Beck's Everyday Zen. I think I like Three Pillars of Zen still. There have been some detractors of that book because of its emphasis on the experience of Kensho or enlightenment, being too heavy-handed, I guess. But I think Yasutani's lectures at the beginning of that book are excellent. They're superb. They're really good. I like, this isn't in the Zen tradition exactly, but it's good to have just one kind of clear, not too long, not too detailed, not too abstruse explanation of Buddhist philosophy and doctrine. And I would recommend What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Rahula. And let's see, what else do I like? Oh, so many books. There are some books by Okamura Roshi that I like. Living by Vow. I would recommend at some point, maybe a little later in practice, getting the complete record of Eihei Dogen, which was translated and put together by Taigen Roshi. So those are some books. And then I can't help. I want to say I have a book coming out in 2015.
Which was going to be that question that I brain farted on.
Yeah. It's a collection of they're Dharma teachings, but somewhat in essay format that find inspiration for Dharma talks in the poetry of Americans who have been influenced by Buddhism or are Buddhists. Mm-hmm. Quite a few of those. So those are some books.
Okay. And could you tell us a little bit, just give us a little kind of glimpse into like what your book's going to be about a little bit more, or maybe just a little sneak peek?
Well, there are, I'm thinking, and the publisher's thinking, there'll be about 15 essays.
Okay.
Each
and you had sent me,
one-
I'm sorry, I cut you off there. You had sent me some material, which actually I'll link to in this, with some of the stuff that's going to be in your book, right?
Right. Yeah. That essay is about a poem by W.S. Merwin. I just love that poem, and I love that poet also. But the style of that particular material is probably not going to be how ultimately how the book looks. It's going to be a little bit different than that, but still the message is going to be the same. So each essay will use one poem by an American poet as, if you will, a springboard for a little close reading of the poem in Zen terms, and then a departure into Dharma teaching based on the themes or the images that are coming up in the poem. So I'm really uniting the two loves of my life here, poetry and Zen.
And when will that be available again about? Do you know?
Probably around the end of 2015.
Okay.
If we're lucky, maybe fall of 2015, but I think winter.
So a bit of ways. Okay. Well, definitely let us know when it is out. And then, and just my last question is not a question, but just, again, if we didn't cover something here that you think we would have benefited from talking about, go right ahead. Or you can say no.
No, I really don't have anything to add. Just go sit Zazen.
All right. Thank you, Gendo.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, I'll turn this off.